Right, we now continue with the business of the day. Motion number two on infrastructure planning. I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Good afternoon. I beg to move that the draft Infrastructure Planning Onshore Wind and Solar Generation Order 2025, which was laid before the House on the 10th of March, be approved. This instrument is another important step in supporting the deployment of onshore wind and solar, which are critical to achieving the Government's mission for clean power by 2030. An effective planning system is key to unlocking the new infrastructure our country needs to deliver our energy security and resilience. It is important that planning applications are determined through an appropriate planning route that reflects a project's size, impact and complexity, where potential issues are identified and mitigated as necessary. The Nationally Significant Infrastructure Projects, or NSIP regime, is governed by the Planning Act 2008, where decisions on development consent are made by the Secretary of State for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. The NSIP regime applies to larger projects with a megawatt threshold determining which energy generating projects are deemed nationally significant. Following submission into the NSIP process, an extensive examination period will commence where interested parties, including local authorities, people of office and the general public, can make written or oral representations to the examination. This ensures that the voices of communities are heard during the decision-making process. Until recently, I will give you.
Wait, rather than traducing what remains of our countryside, what assessment has the Minister made of the UK-Morocco power project run by Eccles that would deliver 11.5 gigawatts of energy, therefore powering up around about 8% of our grid needs? It would seem that the block to this isn't the Moroccan government and isn't the governments of countries through whose territorial seas the cable would pass, but resides instead in Whitehall. And what's the Minister doing about it?
Well, I first of all pay credit to the Honourable Gentleman for the ingenious way he brought that into a debate on solar and wind in the UK. But he raises a good point that we are looking at the detail, of course, of a proposal from a private company that's been put forward, and I'm not going to say anything more on the floor of the House. I've given way already. I'll come back to the statutory instrument that's in front of us today. Until recently, the de facto ban on onshore wind generation in England, introduced by the party opposite, limited deployment of onshore wind in England. These changes to the planning legislation introduced set an almost impossible bar to meet, resulting in the pipeline of projects shrinking by over 90%, with less than 40 megawatts of onshore wind generation consented and becoming operational in the intervening period. In July 2024, this government disapplied those planning policy tests and committed to reintroducing onshore wind into the NSIP regime, reversing the damaging policies of the past 10 years and placing onshore wind on the same footing as solar, offshore wind and nuclear power stations. As such, through this instrument, onshore wind projects with a generating capacity of over 100 megawatts in England will be eligible to be consented under the NSIP regime. 100 megawatt threshold. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I think this legislation is crucial for achieving our net zero commitments. GE Vernova, which is a renewable company in my constituency of Stafford, Eccles and the Villages, recently struggled with really long waiting times for an expansion of their site, which has recently been approved, which for my constituency means good new jobs for people that live there, but also I think it exemplifies the importance of streamlining the planning process, which will eventually lead to lower bills for people in my constituency and around the country. Would the Minister agree with me that this is integral to developing the jobs we need across the country, but also would he like to come and visit GE Vernova with me in my constituency?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that warm invitation. Of course, I'll consider it, and I'm sure I look forward to visiting her constituency at some point in the future. And she makes, of course, an extremely important point that the challenges that we're dealing with through reform to the planning system and through processes like this is that for too long, infrastructure that is incredibly important for our energy security has been held back by delays and by dither in the process. We want to sweep that away and move forward much quicker. And the prize, of course, is energy security, but also, as she rightly points out, jobs and investments in communities right across the country as well. I'll give way, and then I need to make some progress.
The Minister for giving way. He talks about our energy security. What will increase our energy security is issuing new oil and gas licences so we can do more homegrown energy here. Why won't the Minister change his policy on that?
Well, we really are stretching this debate, but I'm very happy to discuss the point, because of course we've raised this point on a number of occasions, and the answer is always the same, that it's not delivering our energy security at the moment. We have said very clearly oil and gas plays a crucial role in our energy mix now. It will continue to play for decades to come, but the North Sea is already in transition, and the reality of the past 10 years under the party opposite was more than 70,000 jobs lost with no plan for how to deal with that. We are determined to deliver on the transition and to deliver our energy security, which gets us off the roller coaster of fossil fuel prices that we're all still facing. I'm going to make a little bit of progress, and I'll come back to the honourable gentleman, because although we have 90 minutes, I'm conscious of time. So, as such, this instrument is around making sure that onshore wind projects in England of a capacity over 100 megawatts will be eligible to be consented under the regime. It reflects advances in turbine technology over the last decade, with modern turbines larger and more powerful. Reintroducing onshore wind into the NSIP regime will provide an appropriate route for nationally significant projects seeking planning consent, where they are of a scale and complexity that local impacts can be carefully balanced against the national benefits and meeting the UK's wider decarbonisation goals. This will provide greater confidence for developers and grow the pipeline of potential projects in England once again. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman who is so enthusiastic.
Yeah, I'm extremely grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the Minister for giving way. He talks about national impact, and I just wonder what provision he was making in these regulations for protected national landscapes. As he, I'm sure, will know, some of the, frankly, windiest places in the UK are often some of our most beautiful. So whether it's the hills and mountains of our national parks, or indeed the downs of our national landscape, like my constituency, the North Wessex Downs, what was an AONB but now a national landscape, and many of my residents are concerned that he's quite right. These huge turbines that we're now seeing developed are likely to mean that certainly for most of our lifetimes we will lose that landscape to these new developments. Will this system still encompass consideration of protected landscape and make sure that it stays as it is for future generations?
Well, the honourable gentleman does raise an important point, and as I've always said from this dispatch box in this job, there is a balance to be struck here where we need to build nationally important infrastructure, and that does mean much more wind in England to match the significant amount of onshore wind that's been built in Scotland, for example, over the past few years, including not far from my constituency. But there's a balance to be struck around protecting land as well, and even if we build the significant number of projects that are needed, there will still be protections for land in the cases that he raises, and the balance it allows through the planning system for those considerations to be taken into account. We already, for example, in the NSIP regime have nuclear, have solar as part of that. We're saying that onshore wind, that the ban introduced by the party opposite was not a rational decision, and we're bringing that back into this process. Well, the Shadow Minister says it was absolutely rational. His own former minister said it was always mad, and I think we should just remember that not everybody in that party, including, I suspect, the honourable gentleman, agrees with that. However, let me come to the second part of this statutory instrument on the question of solar. Solar has been subject to a 50 megawatt NSIP threshold since it was originally set out in the 2008 Planning Act. However, much like onshore wind, solar panel technology has seen significant advances in efficiency, enabling a greater megawatt yield per site. Evidence suggests that the 50 megawatt threshold is now causing a market distortion. Under modern technology, mid-sized generating stations now have a generating capacity greater than 50 megawatts and therefore fall within the NSIP regime. This is likely to be disproportionate to their size, scale and impact. This has resulted in a large amount of ground-mounted solar projects entering the planning system and artificially capping their capacity at just below the 50 megawatt threshold, leading to the potentially inefficient use of sites and grid connections.
Will you give way?
I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The approach set out today is a continuation of the Minister's work to build the clean energy infrastructure that this country needs. And I agree that the capacity threshold and reintroduction of onshore wind generated stations into the definition of national significant infrastructure projects will help deliver the triple benefits of decarbonisation, energy security and job creation. But as the Minister knows, Cornwall is a leader in the rollout of onshore and solar energy. Does he agree with me that this legislation will further opportunities for renewable energy growth across Cornwall that would have just been ignored by the flat earth climate change deniers in the Conservative Party?
Well, I thank my honourable gentleman for the point, although I'm disappointed. Normally when he talks about Cornwall, he invites me to visit Cornwall, but he hasn't on this occasion, so I won't take that personally. But my honourable friend has done a fantastic job since being elected to this place in delivering jobs in his community on this clean power mission, most recently looking at some of the raw materials that are so essential, and he has made some great progress on that, so I pay tribute to him. And he's right, of course, that the scepticism from the party opposite of a policy that they used to support so wholeheartedly, and one that has delivered economic growth right across the country, is one that they're now turned their face against. And whether that's flat earth or not, I'm not sure. The honourable gentleman, the Shadow Minister, I'm sure will regale us with his long list of commitments in this space. But I would just say that what's very clear is that the drive to net zero is delivering industrial opportunities, jobs, manufacturing, investment in communities that have suffered for so long under economic decline, and as well as delivering on our climate ambitions and on energy security, and it's the right path for us to be on. Turning back to solar for a second, raising the NSIP threshold to 100 megawatts for solar will ensure that mid-sized projects have access to a more proportionate planning route via local planning authorities, and should incentivise those projects that would otherwise have capped their capacity to develop to a more optimal and efficient scale. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister for giving way. We talk about the threshold increasing from 50 to 100 megawatts. I wonder if the Minister is aware of what the average size of NSIP projects approved by this government since last July actually is. And if so, why is it that the threshold has been kept artificially low at 100 megawatts and not raised significantly higher? Because otherwise we're going to see huge numbers of smaller projects come through, but classified as NSIPs, rather than larger projects, which the ones that you've approved so far, sorry, the Minister has approved so far, have been of that size.
I know the honourable gentleman has asked me a number of written questions on this particular topic to try and get to the heart of the very question, and he is now testing me on the number that I think we did provide him in one of those written questions. But since it's not at the tip of my tongue at the moment, I will write to him on the answer. But on the general point, I do accept what he's saying. And look, part of what this is about is trying to get to a more rational point where we don't have projects limiting themselves artificially to a level based on this particular figure, but coming up with 100 megawatts. We've set, and I'll come on to the point around whether we've settled on 100 megawatts, why we did that. That we think that is the balance at the moment to be struck, of those larger projects that can deliver the outcomes that we want in the energy system, but keeping a limit on those for the Town and Country Planning Act. For those projects that are coming into the national planning process. So we think the balance is right, but we will continue to look at it, of course, and he's raising important points with me in written questions that I'm happy to discuss with him in more detail. This government is also mindful that mid and large-scale solar and onshore wind projects that might be preparing at the moment to enter the planning system may have already invested and undertaken preparatory steps with the expectation of entering a particular planning regime, and therefore changing the NSIP criteria at short notice could result in projects entering a different regime from the one that they expected to, which could of course potentially increase costs for developers and cause delays. And therefore the instrument before us today also makes transitional provisions for onshore wind and solar projects that are already in the planning process when this order comes into force. These provisions will ensure that projects already progressing under one regime will not be required to move into a different regime. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, through consultation we sought views and supporting evidence on reintroducing onshore wind into the NSIP regime And we've received a range of responses on this question from different groups of people. Most respondents agreed with our approach, a majority agreed with the 100 megawatt threshold. And while we initially consulted on the idea of a higher threshold of 150 megawatt threshold, based on the analysis of those consultation responses, we concluded that a 100 megawatt threshold would be more appropriate and reflect modern technology. This instrument today is another important step forward in delivering our clean power mission, supporting the deployment of onshore wind and solar and establishing the UK as a clean energy superpower. It supports all of the work we're doing as a government on delivering an effective planning system, one that ensures that applications are processed efficiently through an appropriate regime and avoids distortionary effects on deployment. These measures ultimately aim to support our future energy security and resilience alongside our 2030 goals and wider decarbonisation targets, and I commend them to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, and I call the Shadow Minister, Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, in just 4 short weeks, people across England will be going to the polls to determine the future of their local communities. And at this very same time, the Labour Party is seeking to impose on those very same communities vast new energy infrastructure, huge solar farms and wind turbines with blade heights of 180 to 200 metres, destroying swathes of England's green and pleasant land, going against the very wishes of those local people. As ever, only the Conservative Party are standing up for those communities, and only the Conservative Party believes that people in those communities should have a say over their local area. Labour would silence those communities, choosing to impose rather than to seek consent. And in 4 weeks' time, voters across this country will have that choice before them. The order that we debate today provides a route to approval for onshore wind which entirely bypasses the consent of local communities and empowers the zealotry of the Secretary of State to impose infrastructure irrespective of the concerns of local people. Delighted to.
Friend and neighbour for giving way. In my constituency of Gordon and Buchan, the Suey and Corran Hills are subject currently to a planning application for a new onshore wind farm. They're also concerned, but because of that, they're going to get new pop-up infrastructure next to it, whether that be substations, batteries, etc. One project leads to another, It overtakes the local communities. It means that local landscapes change, local businesses change, the impact on farming as well. Does my honourable friend agree with me that these projects can't be looked at in isolation? It has to be the holistic impact of them across the board, not just the individual scheme, one at a time.
I agree more with my honourable friend. Living as we do in the northeast of Scotland and seeing around us the huge increase in energy infrastructure planned for rural communities over the next few years, it is indeed quite daunting, and it's no surprise that there has been such vociferous campaigning against the plans for a new, be it wind turbines, pylons, energy substations, battery storage facilities, all of which are in the pipeline for our communities, and that is why there is such a pushback there, but indeed also why there is such concern across many of the communities that will be affected by this change in England over the next few years, which is why we are opposing the SI before us this afternoon. In their first week in office, the government approved 3 solar farms across Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire and Rutland against the wishes of the local communities. Today he seeks to go further still. In increasing the threshold for solar, he pushes for the development of giant solar farms. To be eligible for the sign-off by the Secretary of State, solar farms have to be 100 megawatt in capacity. Currently, the largest is 72 megawatt, Shotwick Solar Park in Flintshire. This change signals a free-for-all, a literal free-for-all for giant-scale solar. And this instrument brings onshore wind over 100 megawatt capacity into the NSIP scope. In Lancashire, this means Scout Moor 2 in the Secretary of State's gift to approve. Calderdale Wind Farm with 65 turbines covering 9 square miles planned for Yorkshire and would be built on grouse moorland and farmland. In Lincolnshire's prime agricultural land, the breadbasket of England, this means a potential onslaught from proposals despite the County Council's opposition to large-scale plans. I know how much it means to local communities, as my honourable friend, the member for Gordon and Buchan, has pointed out. I myself represent a constituency which is being subjected to vast swathes of energy infrastructure, a whole host of new plans seeking approval over the next few years, which will change indelibly the landscape that people are proud and very happy to live in right now. Delighted to.
Given May, does he agree with me that rather than making it easier for large-scale solar and wind, onshore wind applications, the government should be focusing on fabric first and increasing the energy efficiency of our housing stock and reduce energy demand rather than the destruction of our countryside?
I'd be very keen to see exactly what the government is proposing on that front. The plans that they have, which is stripping away the rights of local communities, are doing great damage to communities across this country, and indeed, frankly, are a shocking disregard. Yes, of course.
Minister for giving way. If the Shadow Minister is so confident about the Conservative Party policy, would he be able to come back to the House after the 1st of May and just see how the Conservatives have performed in those local elections?
I would be delighted to come back after local elections and compare notes at how our two respective parties perform in the local elections of the 1st of May. The choice before the people of England who will be going to the polls on the 1st of May is quite clear. Where you have a Conservative local authority, you get better services at better value for money, as is being demonstrated right now in the comparison between Birmingham and Bromsgrove. There could not be a better illustration of the difference between Conservative Party local delivery and Labour Party failure. That's what's on the ballot paper on the 1st of May, and I will debate with him the arguments around that any day of the week. Yeah. The Labour Party have made no secret of their plans to double onshore wind and treble solar, achieved by empowering themselves whilst disenfranchising local communities. In Lincolnshire, Lancashire and Yorkshire, the party opposite are silencing local opposition. The party opposite risk alienating the British public in their costly rush to a renewables-based system without consultation and with no consent. The race to clean power 2030 is at the expense of all else, at the expense of our energy security, our national security and our standards on ethical supply chains. Just last week in this very House, the party opposite whipped their MPs to vote in favour of allowing Great British Energy to invest in supply chains despite evidence of modern slavery. The Labour Party, the week before, the Secretary of State was collaborating with the People's Republic of China, sacrificing our national security and tacitly admitting that his wrong-headed targets are unachievable without imports made with coal power. Perhaps they received advice on how to achieve community consent from President Xi Jinping. The Honourable yes, of course.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable gentleman, and I understand that this particular sector is out of fashion with the government. But one of the other sacrifices is like to be Scotland and indeed England's precious raptor population, who often suffer, particularly from high-density wind farms, and are effectively minced as they are flying through the air. Certainly in California and elsewhere, we see a high number of bird deaths, particularly birds of prey. Wouldn't the government be better, in his opinion, in putting its time and investment into low-orbit solar, where the UK, along with Japan, leads the world?
I bow to my right honourable friend's expertise in raptors or British bird life in general, but it sounds like an entirely sensible suggestion, and I very much hope that the Minister was taking note and indeed will take that suggestion back to the department in which he is lucky to serve. Now, the honourable gentleman will tell us, and indeed already has told us, that onshore renewable infrastructure can unlock lower bills, or in fact that it is the cheapest energy source. But that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not the case. We have the second highest on-stream renewables in Europe, and yet the UK's domestic energy bills are amongst the highest in Europe. And we know from the OBR that the cost to businesses and households of subsidising renewables will increase from £12 billion to £19 billion by 2030. That is the true cost of their rush to net zero. Now, we are very proud of what we achieved during our years in government, building the first to fifth largest offshore wind farms in the world, generating power for Great Britain, right now halving our emissions whilst growing the economy faster than any other developed economy. But they need to be honest with the British people about the cost of their arbitrary targets. The Labour Party make no attempt to account for the whole system's cost associated with the renewables-dominated system. In fact, the right honourable gentleman, the Secretary of State, cancelled the analysis commissioned by his predecessor. He does not want to know how much it costs, and it is clear that they do not want to know. It is wilful ignorance, Madam Deputy Speaker, driven purely by ideology. At the election, the Labour Party promised us £300 off energy bills. Yesterday, we saw the price caps go up and bills go up. On this side of the House, we stand with communities. We seek to empower local people and we understand their concerns. We oppose this instrument today, which enables the Secretary of State to continue riding roughshod over local communities, local concerns, in vain pursuit of their own legacy. Will the honourable gentleman recommission the whole systems cost analysis, which his government scrapped on day one, and look at the facts? Can he tell us the cost of running the gas-fired power station fleet for 5% of our power, in addition to the rising curtailment costs paid to turn off a growing number of wind turbines? Can he confirm that his proposed community benefits package is significantly lower than the scheme that was considered by the previous government? And can I ask the honourable gentleman what his message is to the residents of Lincolnshire, Lancashire, Yorkshire, Cambridgeshire, Buckinghamshire and elsewhere as they make their decisions on the 1st of May?
We have 4 more speeches if colleagues can be seated. I have to make a statement. Order, order. I will now announce the result of today's deferred division on the draft Eco-Design for Energy-Related Products and Energy Information Amendment Northern Ireland Regulations 2025. The ayes were 349, the noes were 14. So the ayes have it, and next I call Kat Eccles.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for expediting this important legislation to transform the energy landscape in the UK. I have long campaigned for renewable energy measures to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and produce green power of our own. The UK has suffered significantly, like many other countries, with the cost of oil and gas skyrocketing due to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And the party opposite did nothing to help the situation by abandoning much of the country's energy storage, leaving us reliant on these fossil fuels pumped in under the channel. And not taking the issue of energy security seriously, they further compounded the situation by scrapping their net zero targets and championing dirty, polluting gas and oil. Last year, the UK hit a historic milestone with 42% of energy coming from renewable sources, 31% of that generated by wind power. And as energy bills rise yet again, it is clear we need to break the shackles that hold us hostage to energy companies charging extortionate rates just to keep the lights on. British people simply cannot afford for the status quo to continue, both financially and environmentally. I'm proud that this government is leading the way by setting up Great British Energy to give us energy independence, security and longevity, but this needs to be backed up by planning infrastructure changes that support our aims. And I understand the concerns that our countryside and agricultural land could be at risk from development of renewable power sources and upgrading the grid, but I am confident that this government will ensure infrastructure is always in the right place and done in the right way. However, creating this infrastructure is not the end of the story, and due to the lack of energy storage and grid capacity, around 8.3 terawatt hours, that's about 10% of wind power, is effectively lost. And even though the national grid is working at speed to upgrade the networks to ensure that not a single watt hour is lost, we need to do more. 2 years ago, my husband and I upgraded our own home by retrofitting, removing the gas and installing solar panels, air source heat pump and fully insulating externally. But we quickly realised that the battery was not big enough to store the energy we were producing, and despite being able to sell some of it back to the grid, it would be better to be able to store more of it for a rainy or rather snowy, icy day and scale that up. And it's the same situation for the whole country, and we need to harness that additional energy to help reduce the need for fossil fuels. I hope this change will also filter down into the house building industry. It has long been a bugbear of mine that developers are currently only required to install an electric vehicle charging point on new build homes. We need to mandate solar panels on every roof, proper installation so that heat does not escape through the walls, and ensure homes across the country are fit to the future. And may I also, Madam Deputy Speaker, take the opportunity to welcome the fund made available by West Midlands Mayor Richard Parker to help small businesses make the transition to renewable energy. SMEs have been hit hard by energy price rises, with uncapped tariffs causing bills to spiral to unsustainable levels. To drive growth, we need energy energy security to make bills affordable for residents and businesses alike. And breaking down the barriers to tackling climate change and the energy crisis will help meet the government's ambitious targets for energy storage and grid reinforcement. But we must move at pace to match the growth of renewable generation. Streamlining the planning processes and investment in energy storage will help our country transition to a low-cost, green, clean power grid by 2030. Thank you.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Pippa Heyling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are living in the shadow of the former Conservative government's failure to invest in renewable energy and insulate our homes. Failures that have contributed directly to an energy crisis that has left households struggling with soaring bills and businesses facing crippling costs. The majority of people polled in this country want to see more action on climate change and to save our planet, not less. Liberal Democrats are unwavering champions of renewable energy, and now more than ever we need to strengthen our homegrown energy security and stop our dependency on despots like Putin. We therefore welcome the lifting of the effective moratorium on onshore wind, something we have long called for. This was an extremely short-sighted and irresponsible Conservative policy. The planning changes they made in 2015 and 16 introduced a de facto ban in England, resulting in a loss to our manufacturing and local economies, with the project pipeline for onshore wind shrinking by over 90%, with less than 40 megawatts consented and becoming operational in that intervening period. I will do.
Member for giving way. Something that's really important for the rollout of onshore and offshore wind is the supply chain. And the supply chain that we have at the moment in the oil and gas sector will be crucial to its rollout. But that is being worn away, cut away by the rush to end our use of oil and gas from the North Sea. Does the honourable member agree that actually preserving that supply chain by making sure that we've got a managed transition from the North Sea oil and gas sector is vital to any sort of rollout of onshore or offshore wind?
Thank you very much, and I thank the honourable member for raising that point. We are absolutely critically supportive of a just transition in the North Sea and what our progress is towards moving off fossil fuels. And that is alongside and parallel to what must be our increase in renewable energy. So it is right to reintroduce onshore wind into the nationally significant infrastructure regime, ensuring there's a level playing field with other generating technologies such as solar, offshore wind and nuclear that are already assessed under that regime. This motion also raises the threshold for solar projects deemed nationally significant from 50 megawatts to 100 megawatts. In one way, this increased threshold will help to prevent poor land use, given that the previous threshold incentivised developers to put in a cap which was artificial at 49.9 megawatts, and that led to 40% of the proposals coming in at that level. An increase in the threshold, keeping these in local planning decisions, also means that biodiversity net gain will be required of these solar farms, ensuring that where they're approved, they are nature-friendly. And it's that giving local voices a greater say up to 100 megawatts in determining the location and suitability of these large-scale solar projects that is important. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, local decision-making about large-scale solar cannot happen in a vacuum. We need that joined-up approach that balances the need for food security, energy infrastructure, new homes and nature recovery. That's why we welcome the government's launch of consultations on both the land use framework and the strategic spatial energy plans, which should together determine the most strategic energy mix, how much solar we need, what scale, where best to locate it across the country. I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Like me, she is a Cambridgeshire MP, and Cambridgeshire has already seen one of the largest solar farms in the country, of Cumnock, of 2,400 acres approved. We also have another project, as she well knows, in my constituency, that's another 1,900 acres, and others that are in the planning process as well. Does she agree that residents in Cambridgeshire shouldn't have to bear the brunt of taking as many of these projects? I know that she is a staunch advocate for the move towards solar, but like me, would she stand up for her residents if someone was looking to build a nationally significant infrastructure project of that scale in her constituency?
Thank my honourable friend, and this is exactly the point I'm making, which is talking with my constituents particularly around the controversial new large-scale solar farm, the Kingsway solar farm in my constituency of South Cambridgeshire. What we need is both the land use framework and the strategic spatial energy plan that tells us and informs local planning and decision making what scale solar we need across the whole country, where it's best located, where it can fit in and feed into, and what that energy mix is. And again, that mix and the balance between food security, energy infrastructure, homes and nature recovery. Equally, we need to see genuinely significant community benefit schemes applied to these large-scale generation schemes, similar to the community benefit approach applied in Scotland. We want to ensure all national infrastructure projects and major energy generation infrastructure, not just transmission, provide minimum levels of community benefit invested at ward and parish level into community benefit funds determined by the local communities most affected. We need to take communities with us, ensure that they are part of the energy transition that's done with them, not to them. However, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have deep reservations about the government's approach overall to the nationally significant infrastructure programmes in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. This appears to be a power grab, stripping away local voice and letting developers off the hook for their impacts on nature and wildlife. Nature is not a blocker. It's an enabler of good growth and well-being. And whilst we climate-proof our energy system, we also need to ensure that nature is part of future-proofing our economy. And we will always speak up for a climate and nature combined approach. Therefore, while we're supportive of the motion's ambition to streamline planning for major projects like onshore wind, we register our concern about the government's broader changes to the NSIPs and planning, including, for example, the exemption of Category 3 persons from compulsory purchase consultations and the implementation of several Henry VIII clauses which hand sweeping powers to the Secretary of State and undermine local government and local voice. It is entirely possible to accelerate renewable energy deployment, uphold community voice in planning decisions whilst protecting nature. And that's what we need to see. Thank you.
Elaine Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for explaining why this motion is so important and how it will unblock the system and unlock potential. The move to cleaner, homegrown energy demands a nationwide delivery of a critical infrastructure. The current planning system is holding that back. With homegrown energy, we will not have control over energy prices in the UK, and we will need the infrastructure to deliver that. There will always be a degree of opposition to the development of wind farms. That is democracy. It is how you respond to the local concerns that make a difference. Burying your head in the sand, like the opposition benches chose to do for 14 years, is simply not an option. I think it is important to share some of the experiences from my constituency with respect to the development of wind farms. It is important to be clear that Scotland is on a different track, with wind farm developments falling under the National Planning Framework 4. I want to share two lessons from my constituency. People right across the country understand and see the natural benefits of the infrastructure in this motion that will unblock. The local employment opportunities through construction and maintenance, a boost to local economy and increased local spending, and of course a legacy of endless clean energy. However, the experience in my area is that the natural benefits should be topped up with community benefits. Lesson 1 is a need for community benefits that will adopt a fair and transparent model of distributing them. The 9 CCG in my constituency represents 9 Cumnock and Doon Valley communities. They manage and distribute community benefits from multiple wind farm developments across the area. They embody a collaborative community approach to wind farm benefit. This must be the way forward for the country. Lesson 2 is to consider the impact of building this crucial infrastructure on other crucial infrastructures. Take the roads, for example. By the very nature, wind farms are often in rural areas where transport links are already under-resourced. In rural areas, people use roads more to go to work, to shop and for basic living. Building wind farms is a great boost to local economy, but it can take its toll on roads. This means that we need to do more to support and invest in maintaining good road links in these communities. These lessons are about taking people with us when it comes to the transition to clean energy. Ayrshire story is about making the move from coal fields to clean fields. It is one to be replicated, but we need to ensure our communities are on side and in the process.
Final speaker, Ben Obese-Jecty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to reiterate my opposition to the measures this government wishes to impose. The slew of nationally significant infrastructure projects approved by this government since last July is the vanguard of many, many more. In Huntingdon, the proposed East Park solar farm is set to be bigger than Gatwick Airport at 1,900 acres, spanning 6 miles. Nearly 75% of the agricultural land involved is graded as our best and most versatile land. Though the Energy Minister has previously stated to me that no nationally significant infrastructure projects have been consented, which will use greater than 50% best and most versatile agricultural land, this government's track record and ideological zealotry on this point strongly indicates that there is no upper limit on the quantity of agricultural land they are willing to develop on. And I would call back to last week at the Planning and Infrastructure Bill when the Deputy Prime Minister said that she would protect our high-quality agricultural land. I would be very interested to hear from the government as to how exactly they plan to do that, given their track record of building on it previously. I regularly speak to constituents who feel voiceless and ignored. The Secretary of State has shown himself to prioritise ideology over listening to valid concerns, let alone pragmatic details. The government is willing to move the goalpost to reach their aims, and it is my constituents who are paying the price without being heard. They're receiving nothing in the way of direct compensation as a result, no firm commitment to cheaper energy bills, and no firm commitment to ensuring that community benefit funds appropriately compensate local communities. Clause 5 of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill even removes the requirement to consult Category 3 people who would be able to make a claim under the Compulsory Purchase Act 1965, instead informing them that their land would be taken only at the acceptance stage. My online petition of residents in the villages surrounding the solar farm received over 1,100 signatures. This was the only time that these residents feel that they have been able to make their voices heard. I would urge the government to listen to these people and thousands of others like them across our rural highlands. The government takes pride in announcing today in this SI that the solar NSIP threshold has been raised from 50 to 100 megawatts. The average megawatts of a solar farm application in 2010 was 3.8 megawatts. The average solar NSIP application approved since this government came to power is 488 megawatts, to call back to my previous question to the Minister. By keeping the threshold artificially low, this government opens the door to huge numbers of solar farms becoming NSIP by the back door, and I would welcome a review of that NSIP threshold to a much higher level, given the scale that we're seeing of current nationally significant infrastructure projects. And the previous questions, I've asked the Minister about the quality of photovoltaic panels and the fact that they will increasingly create more and more energy going forwards. We must also look at where the panels will be sourced to cover this land. The Energy Minister has previously confirmed to me that the government is determined to eradicate forced labour in global supply chains, including in the manufacture of solar panels. Yet the government whipped members on the benches opposite against a Conservative motion that would prevent Great British Energy from buying solar panels where there is evidence of modern slavery in the supply process. The government is more interested in scoring political points than they are of taking the steps to eradicate forced labour. This government has repeatedly demonstrated that it is prepared to ride roughshod over local wishes in pursuit of its ideological goals. Its manipulation of the system to force through tens of thousands of acres of solar panels, much of which is on our best and most versatile agricultural land, by making rolling changes to national policy statements while keeping the solar NSIP threshold artificially low, shows once again the contempt this government has for our embattled rural communities.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, as well as the contempt that's being shown for local communities and consultation. I wonder if he laments the lack of imagination that's taking place. There are plenty of places that many people would welcome solar farms. For example, motorway and railway embankments that could easily be delineated for this kind of development and wouldn't impact necessarily on our landscape. And also the continuing lack of any compulsion for the inclusion of solar on warehouse roofs. We could probably create exactly the same amount of power as his constituency is likely to create by putting solar panels on the roof of every warehouse in Park Royal to the west of London. And yet again and again we look to virgin land first rather than to be imaginative about better solutions.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And I would call back to the government. The government obviously has a target of building 1.5 million, downgraded in the spring statement, 1.3 million new homes. It would be very sensible for them to implement some sort of legislation that would mean that those 1.3 million new homes had solar panels on the roof. And I would urge the Minister to ask what assessment has been done as to the full scale of how much energy can be generated if we were to do that, instead of building solar farms on our best rural heartlands.
I thank
the Honourable Member for giving way. So would the Honourable Member support the private member bill of my colleague, the Honourable Member from Cheltenham, which he aptly named the Sunshine Bill, which would mandate for all new homes to have solar panels on their roofs?
I believe it's going to go to the vote, but I will look at that in more detail. That is it.
Marvellous, marvellous. I believe, Minister Shanks, you would like to say a few words to wrap up. Is that correct, Minister?
Well, I respond very briefly to some points in the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the leave of the House. I won't detain the House I know we're keen to progress through the order paper. I just want to thank honourable members for their contributions in this particular debate, a very wide-ranging debate, and set out what this motion before us today actually does, which is around lifting the nonsensical ban on onshore wind in England that the party opposite drove through and for 10 years held back so much development for our energy security and economic opportunities across the country. We are lifting that today, and to come to a rational position on solar in the planning system. And to respond very briefly to some of the points on nature and other things, I thought the honourable lady from South Cambridgeshire put it particularly well, where the public want us to take action on the climate crisis, and the party opposite might want to pretend that that doesn't exist anymore, but it does. And the greatest threat to nature in this country is climate change, and we will tackle that. But in doing so, we'll deliver energy security. And so, to the Shadow Minister's point, in 4 weeks' time, I think neither of us will actually have a vote in those elections as Scottish MPs, but people will have a choice of a party opposite that has still not owned up to any of the mistakes that they made in 14 years, or a party that is trying to fix that mess, a party that is moving forward to deliver economic growth and our energy security, or one that would rather hold us back and keep us locked into the rollercoaster of volatile fossil fuels. And today's vote is a chance for us to demonstrate that we want that economic opportunity, we want to deliver the energy security and the climate leadership, and I urge all honourable members on all sides of the House to support us today.
The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. As on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes are Keir Mather and Gerald Jones. I'm so sorry, Gerald Jones. And the tellers for the no. For the noes are James Wild and Ben Obese-Jecty. There we are. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 100.
The ayes to the right was 307, the noes to the left were 100. So the ayes have it, unlock.